Everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Jaboticaba trees. These are Amazonian trees that originated from Brazil and some surrounding countries. Now I have 4 species to talk about, so don't go away. You're going to want to learn all about this. Alright, so let's talk about these trees for a minute. This tree here is a red Jaboticaba. This tree was stepped up to this container back on September 19th of 2021. But today is October 26th of 2022. So you can see the progress in 1 year, and this container has been very little. Now with that said, this other tree is 3.5 years old, just like this. This is 3.5 years old as well. What's the difference? Both of them are seedlings, okay, from the same Jaboticaba red tree, but this guy is much, much larger, much bushier, much better. So what happened with this tree is that this tree was gradually stepped up over those 3.5 years. And this tree, being a red Jaboticaba, has a tremendous advantage to most other Jaboticabas, okay? And we'll compare that and we'll talk about that in just a minute, so don't go away. The great thing about the red Jaboticaba is that this will produce fruit generally within 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years is about the average. Can it take a little longer? Yeah, it can, depending on how you grow it, how you fertilize it, the amount of water, the sunlight. All of that's going to be a factor. Obviously, genetics is a factor, but for the majority of these Jaboticaba reds, they will produce fruit in about 3 to 4 years. So when I come back, we're going to talk about the fruit itself. Okay, so the red Jaboticaba is, like I said earlier, going to produce fruit in about 3 or 4 years. That fruit is reddish colored with some tinges of green, so it'll be a reddish green, but it has a lot of red on it with green little tinges. And eventually, if you leave it on the plant long enough, it will get very, very red. But it is red, it is a thinner skin compared to the next plant we're going to talk about, which is called Sabara, okay? So Sabara is larger, and that fruit you should eat it when it's really, really dark black, like really black, okay? That's when it's going to be at its optimal flavor. If you try Sabara when it's not quite that dark, you're going to get a bit of astringency, kind of like a puckering of the mouth, kind of an acidity, kind of an uncomfortable flavor, or I shouldn't say flavor, it's a feeling that you get in your mouth, and it's not very pleasant. If you've ever eaten a persimmon when it wasn't quite ready, it's not as bad as that, but it's a kind of a similar feeling in your mouth. So now that we talked a little bit about the red, I'm going to just mention something about the one that's on my left over here, and then I'll talk about both of them to kind of give you an idea of the differences. Alright, so this is the red Jaboticaba. Like I said, this one, 3 to 4 years, and you should have some fruit. This is often called precocious Jaboticaba because it produces quite often throughout the season. So what happens is that your Sabara, which is in the back, that can take as long as anywhere on average from about 8 to 10 years. And sometimes I've heard people say they've produced in 6 years, but that's very, very rare. But these trees are better also grown in the ground, the Sabara, because they get much larger than the reds. So your reds are great for container growing and for pretty quick production in terms of the time that it takes a Jaboticaba Sabara to produce fruit. Now, the fruit are very nice, they're both very good. Some people prefer this variety of fruit, like I said earlier, because the astringency is not there if you pick it a little early. Now, this one, you gotta wait a long time. But this one is the most famous one that people talk about, which is the Sabara. Now, there are many other species and other varieties of Jaboticabas, but today we're focusing on 4 of them. And I've already spoken about the red one, and I've spoken about the Sabara. Now, the other thing about the Sabara is you generally get 1 crop, maybe 2 crops a year. And they both need plenty of water, lots and lots and lots of water, and they would take quite a bit of sunlight but you know, you can grow them in a little partial shade, but they're best grown in places where the water filters, but there's plenty of abundance, plenty of water available. They really, really love that. And with that said, they have one interesting thing about them, and that is they're the type of plants that have flowers that actually develop on the main trunk and the older branches. So that is where the flowers develop, right onto the trunks and branches, which is really cool. And there's a word for that. It's called cauliflory. Okay, kind of like cauliflower, but it's cauliflory, and that is when plants produce flowers and fruit right on the main trunk and the older branches on the tree. So if I was to want to have a patio Jaboticaba, this would be a great choice. Not only because it's quick, but because it's multi-cropping, okay, lots of crops, and because I can keep it in a container, get fruit. Now, like I said, this is 3.5 years old. I haven't got any fruit yet, but I think I will real soon, because as the weather begins to get cooler, that is when they seem to like to produce the fruit the most. So I'm hoping this year, coming you know, January, hopefully December, January, maybe we'll I shouldn't say this year, I should say December going into next year, hopefully we'll have some fruit on it. Now, if you want to grow them in containers, go for a red Jaboticaba. And if you eventually want to put it in the ground, get yourself a Sabara or other type of larger Jaboticaba. This one, being the Sabara, is already 6 years old, and this would be a great tree to put into your landscape because it'll do much better. All right, so here you're looking at the two 15-gallon Jaboticabas. These are the ones. I've got some notes on these containers, and you'll notice if you're looking carefully that I put in the type of fertilizer that I use. And I use an 1868 because when they're young, you really want to get them growing. So using a lot of nitrogen really helps. So 1868. One key thing is you want to use a time release. A lot of people will use regular fertilizer, and that can burn up your trees really bad. You can really burn them up. It can cause a lot of problems. So get a time release fertilizer, or better yet, use something that would be organic, acidic type fertilizer that you would periodically put into the soil. That are the Sabara variety. These trees have a lot of peat. These have half of the mix is peat. That's very important. They love that. They love the peat. So what I use is I use a good potting mix or potting soil, and then I add 50% peat. Some people use as much as 70% peat, and then they just add perlite, and that can work well. But I find it, for me, it kind of dries out too quickly. So for me, I like to use half peat and half potting soil. And so here you're looking at two more red Jaboticabas that are in 15-gallon containers. The one on the right was stepped up from a 7-gallon on October 6th of 2022. So that's not that long ago. The one on the left is also a red Jaboticaba, and that one has azomite, mycorrhizal, biochar, and it has, in this case, it says 1/2 peat. So it has 1/2 peat with the potting soil or potting mix, like I had explained earlier. And this one was 9/5/21, and you could tell it's much bigger than the one on the right. Now keep in mind, the one on the right was in 7-gallon, and having been in 7-gallon, obviously it grew a little bit slower. But the one on the left was 1 year of growth, and it has azomite, biochar, and like I said, half peat. So the peat is really important because it maintains that lower pH. Now speaking of the pH, the red hybrid Jaboticaba really prefers to have even lower pH than Sabara. So keep that in mind. You want to keep that pH much lower than any pH that you're using that's working for you on the Sabara. Now the Sabara does well even in limestone, down in the Redlands and places like that. They seem to be more tolerant of higher alkalinity. So when you're starting out seedlings of the red, it's critical that you maintain a low pH. So a lot of people will start them, or people who know will start them in a lot of peat moss, sometimes literally all peat moss with a little bit of perlite mixed in, maybe just a little bit. And they got to keep them moist. It's really important. That'll get them to germinate quickly, and it'll give you the high acidity that you need to make sure the plants get off to a great start. I like to keep an eye on the moisture, very critical. You don't want these trees drying out on you, you really don't. The alkalinity can also contribute to the tips being burnt really bad, but it can also contribute to chlorosis, which is deficiencies like iron, for example, and minerals. But you can also, from the alkalinity in the water that you're using, can also burn and your leaves don't look very healthy. So try to use rainwater, try to avoid the city water. Believe it or not, these things are getting nothing but city water or rainwater because I have no other option here, except obviously when it rains. But they do get a lot of water from the house tap, and it seems to affect my seedling trees more than it does, I should say, I correct myself, it seems to affect the red Jaboticaba seedlings during their seedling stage more than it does these bigger ones. And I think the reason for that is there's just so much more peat mixed in to these guys. They have a lot more peat, as much as half. So half to even 70% is not unheard of. So keep that in mind, and I think you'll start noticing that if you're having an issue with your pH and with your plant's health, increasing the amount of peat is going to make a huge difference. Now I'm going to show you two more quickly, and then we're going to wrap it up. All right, so I have two other Jaboticabas to talk to you about. This one is M. vexator. These are little seedlings. So this is also a Jaboticaba variety in the myrtle family, related to these guys that we're talking about, and it's also named as blue grape. Okay, so this is a very, very I could say I've seen these, and they're very bushy. Okay, they can get pretty wide and pretty bushy, and they produce a pretty decent fruit, but I'm not particularly fond of it. I've tried them a couple of times, and you know, nothing really fantastic. But this plant here is called a yellow Jaboticaba, and this one is about a year old in the pot from a seed, and then this is also a year old, and you can see it was stepped up from here to a 3-gallon, and then from the 3-gallon it went to the 7-gallon. So you can see that the growth, big difference in the growth. So stepping them up is very important for your plant to look its best, grow its best. The faster they grow, the more beautiful they get, and hopefully they'll fruit a little quicker. Now I don't know how long it takes the yellow to produce fruit. I really don't remember, but it is a delicious yellow Jaboticaba that has very similar flavor to the traditional Jaboticabas. There's another name for it. I think it's called cabadula or cabadella from Brazil. That's what they call it. This one has fuzzy. It's a little bit of fuzziness, very minor. You can kind of tell just a little bit of fuzziness on the leaves. Very little bit of fuzziness. You notice it more on the new growth. But the fruit also, from what I remember, if I'm not mistaken, also is tiny little bit of fuzziness on the outside. So anyway, I wanted to show you the 4 different types of Jaboticaba trees, and give you a little bit of care, which is basically, you know, the amount of acidity is important, and also lots of water. They can tolerate full sun, but if you're challenged with the amount of water you can give them, or places a spot that dries out very quickly, and maybe partial shade or bright area would be a better choice for you. I hope you learned something, and I hope you give us a thumbs up. All right, we'll see you again. Have a great one.